Hey, praise the Lord, guys. I'm Shaw Greenhorn. And if any man shall give you a cup of water in my name to drink, because you belong to Christ, I verily ask you unto you, he shall in no wise lose his reward. And if anyone shall offend one of these little ones that believe in me, it were better that a millstone be hanged around his neck, and he be cast into the sea, into the depths of the sea. And I say unto you, if thy hand offend thee, pluck it off, cast it from thee. It is better to enter into life maimed than having both hands to be cast into hell, where the fire is never quenched, not on their worm dieth not, neither is the fire quenched. And if thy foot offend thee, pluck it off, cast it away from thee. It's better to enter into life halt, and having both feet cast into hell, where the fire dieth not, where the fire is not quenched, the worm dieth not, neither is the fire quenched. So here we see Jesus, handing out some absolutes. Sometimes it's good to keep your eyes on the bottom line. And these statements are bottom line statements. You ever heard the saying that, I was sad because I had no shoes until I met the man that had no feet? It's like there's always a layer, below what you could get to. We see him starting out here with promises, bottom line promises that, if any man shall be favorable unto you. So there's two sides to this coin, right? What was the other side? There's this side, if any shall give a cup of cold water to you to drink, he shall not lose his reward. What's the other side? Whosoever shall not hear your words, when you leave that city, shake off the dust of your feet. People think that there's an in the middle. In the middle is what he said to Laodicea. You're neither hot nor cold. You're gonna get spewed out. So there are all three angles, right? So these are all some, bottom line. I guarantee you, people that lose their passion in life, people that you never seen an athlete that he started out good and then, he faltered, he fizzled out. The bottom line. He lost what drove him to be great. They say that poverty sometimes is the greatest motivator, or at least it can be to the mind that is trying to achieve. Being afraid to go back to poverty, to go back to nothingness. I once heard somebody say that the richest people in the world, that they're actually running away from poverty. That's what, somebody said. These principles keep you, sharp. Because, when somebody gets success, and that's why it's always good to have goals. You see, when you have goals, it's something to strive for. Sometimes, some people are so fortunate that they achieve everything they put before them, and it would seem as if they have no more goals to achieve. It would seem that way. That's because, with the more goals you achieve, I think the deeper you have to reach to find more. Sometimes it'll come easy, but I guarantee you, over time, you're going to achieve those goals. And let's say you've been achieving goals for 10, 15, 20 years. You know how deep you're going to have to dig to find goals to improve on other goals achieved. That's a great one. Improving on the stuff already achieved. So, in this moment, he's addressing everyone. And he addresses them in a matter-of-fact kind of way. He addresses them to let you know that there's boundaries, there's limits. Don't go crossing over a limit and then, expect that it's just going to be all good. He speaks in a very matter-of-fact kind of way to them. Yeah, God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son. Yeah, no greater love hath a man than this, than he laid down his life for his friends. But what does he always say? When the Son of Man cometh, he shall separate the wheat from the tares, right? Don't go playing around and end up becoming a tear to be gathered to be burnt. Because sometimes we play knowings with people. In my country, we say you play knowings, or you try to brown nose, or to show familiarity. A really terrible example would be, imagine a person achieve, a success, a great success. I know somebody who maybe saw them once or twice, but they weren't really friends, and they come around them trying to assume, friendship to get certain things. They're trying to play that they were cool from day one. They try to, bring up stuff that maybe not even exist. And this successful person, they're looking at them. And, they might even fall into the trap and go at it for a while. But I guarantee you, at some point, they're going to be like, listen, do I know this person? And they're going to have to set them down. Because, Jesus, he knows that this moment is coming. What did he say? Many shall say unto me in that day, Lord, did we not prophesy in thy streets? Did we in thy name cast out devils and many wonderful works? Did we do not this? Did we do not that? Depart from me, I never knew you. If you look at what Zebedee's mother, his son's mother did, when they were arguing, who's going to be greatest in the way? And they were arguing. And later we see the mother come, said, grant me this thing. I want that my sons, one on the left, one on the right. Trying to use, a mother to get things that they have not earned or is not theirs. It goes in the same line because, how many mothers in that day will try to speak for their children? Children has been cast out, but the mother made it. Or, the mother be cast out, the children made it. Family members and friends. How many people would try in that day to speak for somebody? Here's the beginning of that answer. Look at how he's speaking to them right now. Because it would appear that he would have to choose between familiarity, and procedure. People that, start their business, sometimes, they'll be selling products or services, but then they'll have a friend come around, and this friend, he just wants discounts in everything. So no, this person, they have a choice to make. Am I going to, give these discounts and make, Maybe it's not gonna hurt the business, right? Let me just say that maybe it's not gonna hurt the business, but are they gonna go and give discounts that they're gonna lose? Obviously, even if it doesn't hurt the business, they still lose. So no, they have this choice to make. Am I gonna walk the straight line, or am I gonna play familiarity? Jesus, he's setting the tone right here that no familiarity is gonna be played. He's setting the tone for the positive side and the negative side. You ever hear the saying, "Who the shoe fit, wear it"? Because I guarantee you, many people in that day, instead of doing what was right, instead of doing what was required and asked of them, they're gonna try and play familiarity. You just see, all right, when he went to his hometown to preach, did they not reject him? They said that whence had this man these things? Whence had he this doctrine? Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? As his sisters, are they not all here with us? And they were offended of him. He couldn't even do any miracles there. This is the kind of world where you see these very people that rejected him because they knew his mom and sisters and brothers. It's the same argument they're gonna bring to him. We knew your mom, we knew your brothers, sisters, the very same people that rejected him. But we knew your mom, we knew your brothers and sisters. We knew them while they were here, rejecting him for that very reason. Trying to play familiarity. So we see him start out here, looking, at it from a children's perspective. Because they just asked the question, which one of us shall be greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And he set this child before them. Unless you become as these little ones, that you shall not enter. Whosoever shall humble himself as this child. This is just a continuation. This is the first one is really, setting the tone for his ministers. Because he said the time will come when men shall kill you and say that they do, my work. You shall be persecuted, He even told them, when you're in Jerusalem, flee to the mountains. He that is on the rooftop, let him not come down to take that which is in the house. Woe to them that be with children. So whosoever shall give you a cup of cold water, and this is the least of things. Sometimes when we hear this, we just assume the cold water, right? If you remember, it was Elijah when he used to pass by that, with the old lady and her husband, they had no son, they had no children. And she said, I perceive that this is a man of God that passeth by. Let us make for him a little room and a table with a lamp and a bed, so that when he's passing by, he could rest here. And he did that. She did that. And, Elijah said unto her, what is it that you, seek? She said, we have no children. And then he said, according to the time of life, by this time next year, you shall, embrace a son. And then it was this very son that died. She said, have you come to call my sin to remembrance? Elijah brought him back. It's not just a cup of water. She made him actually a place to stay right here. How many people nowadays, he said, you saw me a stranger, you took me in, you fed me. When I was hungry, you gave me meat. Thirsty, you gave me drink. I was sick and in prison, you came and ministered unto me. I guess in his mind right here, the cup of cold water was the smallest and least thing that he could think of. In those days, remember, we didn't have the luxuries that we have now. It was water, wine, they had juices, maybe, the food, it was bread and then meat, cakes. There was no Applebee's or McDonald's. No Waffle House, no 10-star restaurant, stuff like that. So he listed the list of things to let you know that anything that you do positively, because you see, my people, they're going to be facing so much turmoil. They're going to be facing so much hate, so much persecution. That you see, every kind face that they see is going to mean so much to me. Because remember, I'm going to be up in heaven watching all these things happen. God does intervene, but is he going to intervene and save everyone? For every 10 that gets persecuted, how many is he, gonna? The first Christian, the first person of God to be thrown to the lions was Daniel. God saved him, right? Now we know that there were coliseums where they threw, bunches, handfuls, many Christians in at the same time. He doesn't save all of them, right? So you see, for every kind face that they see, it's gonna mean so much to him. And that's what this is saying. He goes on, to mention the children. Anyone shall offend one of these little ones. To offend them, it means so many different things. To steal their innocence. Little children, they believe in the tooth fairy. They believe in the Easter bunny. Anything you tell them, they believe it, and they're always so happy. To offend one of these is to rob them of their innocence. No, there's many ways to rob a child of their innocence. The way you treat them, the way you talk to them, the things you do to them. The abuse, mentally, physically. Crushing their dreams, really. Crushing their spirit, crushing their dreams. Teaching them to be mean-spirited, to offend one of these little ones. Some children, they get, broken beyond repair, and they walk through life broken. And when this has happened to a person, I always say that what's the external indicator? It's not like they walk around with a green lamp over their head, or under their feet is like a purple shadow or something. They walk around just like regular people, and then they're damaged, they learn, and then they go and they spread the same thing. And then the last one we see where it's talking about the tough choices, really. The one hand or the one foot. It's really the tough choices. And the bottom line is what he's saying here is that, making these choices is going to feel as if you're losing a part of yourself, literally. Lot's wife, the angel said, leave, don't even look back. You see, the more she walked, the more she felt she was losing herself. She had to turn back. We know the 10 lepers, they turned back to give God glory, but that's different. Lot's wife, the more she stepped away, she felt that pain, the flesh, really. Is she going to go somewhere new? And if the men of Sodom were living like this, who knows? All right, so let's get into these scriptures. It starts out saying, and whosoever shall give you a cup of water to drink in my name because you belong to Christ, verily I say unto you, he shall in no wise lose his reward. So, whosoever shall be considerate of you, like this woman that helped Elijah, she saw him and she considered him. So, it just really shows you your heart also. We can have 10 people look at one thing and then you ask them to describe what they saw. You see the different things that they say. Even worse if you ask them what it means. Now that's where you really get, people, they'll describe the similar things if you ask them what they saw. But then you see when you ask them what it means, that's when you see they get the really separating. And you see for every higher order question you ask, that's where you see the more separating. So what did you see first? Second, what does it mean? Third, how can we apply this to the world? Fourth, what are the consequences that could happen if we're not careful? The more higher order, you will see the difference in thoughts being separated. So to see, one of his people out and for you to think positive of them, that's the issue here. But there's going to be so many that see them that they're going to, abuse them, mistreat them. Look at Apostle Paul before he was Paul, when he was, Saul, by the way. Anyone he saw that belonged to Christ, he rounded them up, putting them into prison. So what he's really getting at here is the inner process. Because, you're looking upon, God's people. So he's getting right here at the inner process. Whosoever shall give you a cup of cold water, because I guarantee they looked at you, they saw your struggle, and they said, how can I add positively to your day? The scribes and Pharisees, when Jesus was in the temple, they watched him to see if he would heal, doing something good so that they could what? They could accuse him. Looking at this information, and we're going to destroy him with what we get. So if this person give you that cup of cold water, whatever it might be a ride to wherever you're going. It might be an invitation to dinner, might be a book, that's going to help you. Whatever it is, something to uplift you and not tear you down. Because there's so many woes, unto his people, and warnings of things to come and how they're going to be treated. Ultimately, what he says, like I said, the day is going to come when they're going to kill you and say that they do God's service. Or so the next scripture says, whosoever shall offend one of these little ones that believe in me, you are better than a millstone be hanged around his neck, and he be cast into the depths of the sea. In Revelation, there's a point where it says, and death gave up those that were in there. Hell gave up those that were in there. Even the seas gave up those that were in there. We see Leviathan being mentioned. It is said that this creature lives in the sea. I've heard, fairy tales saying that Leviathan is so, scary that even the devil is afraid of Leviathan. You being cast into the depths of the sea. I mean, you only die once, right? It's not like you're going to keep dying in there. So what is the significance? If he could have mentioned anything. He could have mentioned the hottest hell, the greatest pain. But you know what? When God made man, in the beginning, it said that he blew the breath of life in him and he became a living soul, right? Breath of life. Breath. Think about that. The breath of life. What does the ocean compare to the breath of life? Only fishes can breathe and certain, those animals. God created man separate from, every fish in the sea, every scaly, great whale, and he listed all of them, right? That this implies a deeper, construct because the breath that we carry, literally, being canceled out in the sea. Man cannot breathe in the sea. If you get shot, you die. The breath goes away also. So like I said, to whosoever offends one of these little ones. So to offend one of these little ones, Jesus himself was counted, a rock of offense. He said, I lay in Zion a chief cornerstone, a rock of offense. But whosoever shall believe on him shall not, see death. When that everywhere he goes, he's going to offend people. And that's exactly what happened when he was here. But this offense, sometimes it's better to leave people alone than to go over there and mess with them. Because just like what the previous one, where if you saw his people, whether they be, evangelists, missionaries, or just regular believers, all they do is go to church. They don't, do anything beyond that. It's the thought process that gets into your mind and then what you do. In a court of law, there's a difference between, premeditated and just regular, offenses, especially like murder, right? If it's premeditated, then you get a heavier sentence because you sat there longer and you thought about it, which means you had time to think out of it, but you chose to continue thinking in it. So whosoever shall offend one of these little ones, children, they're so resilient. I would say, you'll see children, get in an argument with each other, and then 5 minutes later they're still playing again, right? You could, an adult, could be in a negative, mood with a child, but then they just come and say, I'm sorry, and then, all is forgiven. Because, to offend a little child, it takes so much. It's consistent. It really takes a lot of consistency. It takes a lot of consistency to offend a little child. So you see when he's saying, he that whosoever shall offend one of these little ones, you didn't just go up to them and say, oh, Santa Claus isn't real, and then you left. No. This is the kind of thing that it takes stages. These things happen in stages. It's stage one, stage two, stage three, stage four, and there you are pursuing all the way to the end to to offend this child. When there was in the days of Elijah, there was the drought. God said, "I will send the rain that you shall see not a cloud." What did he say? Cloud nor rain, but the valley shall be filled with water. There was a time when he sent his servant to go look if he saw anything. Servant came back saying no. Send him again. He came back no. Then he said, I see a cloud as small as a man's hand. And then, it got bigger. It didn't just happen just all at once. There was a first look, a second look, a third look, a fourth look, right? So for you to offend one of these little ones that believe in me, that means you were adamant. That means you offended them and they felt it. But then what? They bounced back, right? And you went after them again. They were offended. And then they bounced back again. No, I don't know. The third one, maybe they didn't bounce back. Fourth one got worse. So now here you are, offending in this little one. So the next one says, if thy hand offend thee, pluck it off, cast it away from thee. For it is better to enter into life maimed than having both hands cast into hell, where the fire is not quenched. So just to skip ahead, there's two, descriptions given. The hand is maimed, but the foot is halt. I might forget to, explain the difference, so I'll do it right now. So the foot being messed up, that's also maimed. The hand and the foot both can be maimed, but the foot is halt. Why? Because that's really how we walk around, how we get around, right? So even though if either is gone, if both of them is maimed, but the foot is more halt because you need that to walk, and that's one thing you can point out right here. So if that hand offend thee, we use the hands to reach for things, we use the hand to hold things and handle things. So if that hand offend thee, pluck it off, cast it away from thee. What is to offend? It's the same thing for the little children and for his people that I was saying, his disciples or whatever, his preachers, ministers, evangelists. A one-time thing is not an offense. It's a mistake. Two-time. All right, so we're getting a little too comfortable here. Now, the third time, we're forming a habit. And then after that, it's something that, offense, I would say, is when we notice that, this thing is causing something. It's been going on long enough. It's not something that you just stop. If it was just one time, it would have been just a mistake, then after that, it starts to become a habit. But then we notice it. You see that this thing, is when we can see it and we see the effect that it's having on our life. What is an offense? It's something that doesn't enlighten us. It doesn't uplift us. As a matter of fact, it does the opposite. It drags us, into perdition, into problems with the flesh, into lust, into, unclean thoughts, lasciviousness, into just practicing evil, the heart that devises wicked imaginations. So cast it off, pluck it away from thee. This is something that's gonna hurt, getting rid of. I used to really like, watching movies, but the place that they left me in, I had to give it up. Even watching some of my most favorite shows. Because then, these strongholds would come over me. But then when I would stay away from it, it would go away. So to cast it away from thee is you're casting your hand away from thee. It's like this thing is it's become so much a part of you. It feels literally like getting rid of one of your own body parts. That's how much attached to you this thing has become. So it's better to do this than to enter into hell where the fire is never quenched. Where the worm dieth not, neither is the fire quenched. Prophets have given, accounts, even though it's not good to go by these things. But just to share with you, they've seen where in hell, like the flesh will be burnt to ashes, and then the body is just reformed only to be burnt again. Sometimes it just stays in there and it doesn't get consumed. Like and when Moses saw the burning bush, the Bible says that he saw the bush and it was burning, but it wasn't consumed. Burned, but it never turned to ashes, pretty much. So, both is possible. Where the worm dieth not. When you die, right, the worms are supposed to eat you. But, it would make sense that this would happen because death is, hell, they say, is the second death, the lake of fire, right? Or hell is a form of death. The lake of fire is the second death. When a person dies and they're in the earth, the worms come and eat them, right? When do the worms go away? When they've eaten everything, right? So if the flesh is always there or it reforms, then when do the worms ever get a chance to leave? Now I would imagine these worms, they are protected from this fire because it would roast these worms, right? The heat that's in that place. So it's safe to assume that they are protected from this fire. But the people in there are not. So the next one says, if thy foot, offend thee, pluck it off, cast it away from thee. It's better to enter into life, halt, and to having both feet cast into hell in the fire that never quenches. So this is the feet now. What's the difference between the hand and the feet? The hand is just to hold on to things. The feet carry you places. Both of them really mean the same thing, and there's hardly both of them mean the same thing, and there's hardly separation to be done. But you can appreciate some subtle differences, right? The feet are used to take you places. Maybe going certain places, being around certain people. So the feet can even be, so I could say that the feet is but it's more like the places or situations where you find yourself. Situations and places. But the hands is more like the things that you do, I would say. The things that you handle, drugs, alcohol, smoking, things that you might do on your computer. The hands might be meant to say the things that you do, but then the feet, the places or the places you go are the places you find yourself in or the situations. If I could say that there's a difference. And the feet, is halt, because if to cast out one of the feet, then you can't move as freely. And it feels like that sometimes, when it comes to your awareness and you get, you understand that, it's not so good for me to be in this place. You can literally feel yourself like trying to hold yourself from walking in that direction to go there. You can literally feel it. So you cutting off that foot is halt. You can't move. You don't, it's the longer you stay away and the more you do it, it's gonna the feeling is gonna lessen until you don't miss it no more. So it ends off saying where the fire is not quenched and the worm dieth not. The same thing. So it doesn't. And this just goes to show you if you end up in hell because of what you used to do or where you used to go, the outcome is the same. The fire is not quenched and the worm dieth not. Hell doesn't care how you ended up in there. The Bible says that hell enlarges itself daily. Hell doesn't ever say, listen, we're full. Hotels, when they're at full capacity, they'll put a no vacancy sign on the outside. Hell doesn't ever have that. Bible says hell enlarges itself. So overall, these, like I said, scriptures is really a bottom line, thing. Companies that go out of business. Sometimes it's the economy, sometimes it's competition. They find it cheaper somewhere else. Ever since Amazon opened up, I'm pretty sure, Radio Shack went out of business because of Amazon. I guess the greatest thing I could use is like an athlete, because you know that their job is based on performance. They lose the bottom line of why they started. They lose their hunger. They lose their passion. When you weren't living in that 40-bedroom house with butlers. When you had to be better than the next man standing next to you, or you would be kicked out. You would be forgotten. You're a superstar. People worship you instead of you having a reason to prove to them that you deserve the life that you're asking for from them. And that's the difference. People cross over from feeling the need to prove their worth to taking, praise and, reverence from people. So they're no longer, fighting to show that they're worthy, but instead, they get relaxed and assume acceptance, praise. They stop putting in the hard work. Some of the times the case is, even if I was to stop playing right now, I would have enough to take care of myself for several generations. Imagine finding motivation to be, at top of your game. But people lose passion, right? Maybe having only ramen noodles to eat that kept you so sharp because you know that you were on your last leg. And if anything were to happen, you would fall into nothingness. So you had motivation to keep going. You had motivation to be better than the next man. You had motivation to keep your output to the highest level. I am Straw Greenhorn.